computer. Here we go. Good morning, fellas.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, good to see everybody.
I can't get my thing viewing here.
We can see you, Tatsi. So.
Yeah.
I can't. I don't know how I lost my screen. I went to get my volume up and then I lost it. So.
Well, we'll let you kind of work on that. And
okay. Thanks.
Bill,
Sorry.
Yeah, Bill, I haven't said good morning to you. And Art,
Good morning.
I can't recall if I did. You guys, thanks for joining in. So,
Absolutely.
This morning, of course, we're in the Gospel of John, as you are fully aware, and we're going to look at just verse 11 this morning, guys. And I'm kind of sheepish about it because it's only one verse, but it's not like we haven't done this before. But man, there is so much in here that it's of practical value to me, and I hope to us. I'd like to just kind of focus in on that. But primarily, before we launch into more of a deep dive on verse 11, just look at a preview. We know from the text that Jesus is attempting to impart something, and that's my perception. And where I'm keying off that idea is the word test. He's setting something up. He's testing Philip, and we assume the other disciples. And we're assuming that there's something more that he's setting up is more than just, even though it's a miracle, feeding the multitude is a miracle in itself. But my perception is there's actually something more he wants to impart to the disciples. And hey, Carl, thanks for joining in. And good to see your name on the screen.
Yeah.
And then, by the way, this is interesting. The account of the feeding of the multitude is the only miracle shared by all four gospel accounts, and which we're going to get to that a little bit better later. But I think that's interesting. The story begins with an approaching high demand. Now we're kind of looking at what is really happening, and we're also looking at how it relates to us in our lives. This approaching high demand, which part of that is a potentially high stressful need. We've got hungry people on the march and coming towards Jesus. So that's a large group. And then there are two responses to this impending need, representing two very different ways of thinking. And we looked at that last week, and I'm going to just review that slide. I put it on the screen as a left and a right. We've got on the left, Jesus asking a where question. Where do we look? Where are we going to go, Philip, to buy bread? Philip and Andrew respond with a what answer. They move, and I'll just kind of move very quickly through this. That we went into more detail last week, but where I want to get to is here. Jesus is asking a sourcing question, and Philip and Andrew are immediately moving to problem solving. How are we going to solve this problem? And that represents two very ways of thinking, two very different ways of thinking. And I can absolutely relate to Philip and Andrew, because that's how my mind has acted for most of my entire life, is that when a high stress, high demand situation comes up, my head goes to problem solving. But this study in this text is kind of, it's kind of raised a question, Mike, hey, are you approaching these things the correct way? And I'm maybe not so. So I see that Mike Melander's joined us, and Jeff, you guys, thanks for joining in. Continuing with this preview, once Philip and Andrew their response to this impending need, Jesus states, I love this, have the people sit down. I love that. And that's what we really focused in on last week, where Jesus quiets the demand. He quiets the demand. And we broke out in the sessions last week, breakout rooms, and we talked about how do you and I quiet this barking demand, this screaming voice of demand. How do we quiet our souls? And that's what we talked about last week. Quiet, and then I summarized, quieting the demand means implementing some sort of practice, fellas, with the intent to quiet the mind, body, and heart so one can hear static free. That is what we talked about last week, and we all had opportunity to share how we do that. You know, what we've learned over our lifetimes of how do we clear the static and the noise so we can hear accurately. Now we move to verse 11, and we're going to take segments of this. Jesus took the loaves. He took these 2 loaves, and he gave thanks. The first thing he did was he gave thanks. And here it is. Jesus gives thanks. And from a state of quietness, remember we followed up. He had the people sit down. And so I'm kind of extrapolating this idea as we're watching this story develop. From a state of quietness, it's much easier to recognize what resources are present, thus the loaves, one's current state, and what truly is at this given moment in time. And I look at this giving thanks as a recognition of those things. I've been having fun thinking about this, and I shared this at dinner. We've had the family in town. We had all 4 kids home over the weekend, and we had a really wonderful time. And one time at mealtime, I shared with the family. I've had, through my study, I've had a whole new appreciation of this idea of giving thanks at meals. Got to say that much of my life has just been perfunctory, giving thanks, but a moment of stopping before we eat is a quiet recognition of where this has come from. And I have gained new appreciation for that. And I think that working out of a state of quietness makes it much, much more meaningful. In contrast, while being in a state of direct reaction to the screaming demand, it's nearly impossible to accurately discern these things. If we're in a high state of tension, stress, it's hard to recognize anything. It's just reactive mode. And that is certainly not where Jesus is coming from. So he gives thanks. He distributes to those who were seated. Note, the text states that Jesus was the one who distributed the food. In the other 3 accounts, it is the disciples who received from Jesus to then distribute to the entire group. What's your take on that? What's your initial response? Why would John describe this account in this way? What do you think? This isn't a test.
Yeah, I got a thought.
Yeah.
Also, the other versions of this, it's not a question, it's an imperative. He says, you feed them. And then they raise the question, how are we going to do it? And this is only when he starts it with a question saying, where are we going to buy this? So it's an interesting shift.
Yes, it is. What do you think of that?
John must have some insight here. The other 3 must be recounting something that maybe from more distance than John does. Maybe John was right beside him. I don't know, but he remembers it as a question. The writer, it does, I should say.
Yeah.
And then Jesus distributed, and I don't know, Mike. The question's the interesting part for me, but the distribution, maybe they say Jesus did it was sort of a obliquely based. Jesus told the others to do it, but a lot of times, in business or something, somebody will make a decision, and then somebody under them will carry it out, but they'll say that person did it because he
Yeah.
initiated the
Yeah,
action.
it very well could be. Um,
I think it's actually a what would you call it? A kind of a description of what's going to happen in the future, which is where he gives the disciples the responsibility of spreading the gospel. So I think this is, I don't know whether it's because he's trained them or getting them so that they are going to take the responsibility when he leaves here and goes to heaven.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Is this the second feeding? I've been gone for a while, but are we in the second feeding of like the 4,000 instead of the 5,000, or is it just feeding?
This is the first account in John's Gospel.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Did you have a comment, Senior Jeff, Rabbi Jeff?
No, I did if this was the second, but it makes no sense now.
That maybe they got it the first time or something, or he wanted to follow up and.
Oh, no, if it was the second account, or if it was the
Yeah.
second feeding, I was thinking maybe it was him reminding them of where the feeding comes from.
Yeah.
The first time he tells them to feed them, but maybe they didn't get the fact that this is from me, so I'm going to show you on this one. But if this is John's account versus the other Gospels, then
Yeah. Any other? Well, there's been some really great responses to that, Bill and Totsi, and any other thoughts on this?
The other question in the original question you started with was a where question, and then you were talking about giving thanks, and so often our grace is thanking for the food, right? Or bless this food which we're about to take, where Jesus is going to the source, giving thanks to the source.
I love that. Yeah.
Right. So
that's good, John.
The where and the what is the focus is to come from, where is this miracle taking place? Who, where, as opposed to how we're going to do this problem solve. So the only thing I can think of, I have no idea to answer your question, but the idea that, Jesus, John may be focusing more on Jesus as opposed to the miracle itself.
Well, I think that's kind of my take on it, John, is that this is an extremely Christocentric gospel. Not that the others are not, but it's John, I believe, is looking ahead to the resurrected Christ, and really building a basis here that it is the Christ, to which all life, all existence find their meaning and their purpose. Paul stated this same idea numerous ways in his letters, but I think that that is kind of I think it's a theological reason here, and I think Bill's point was or could have been I can't remember, but the whole idea of doesn't necessarily mean he benched the disciples, but it's just to distribute to 5,000 people would take some time, and it sure could use some help. I don't think it is meaning that the disciples were not engaged, but it's just the language he uses to point to the centrality of Christ here. So. John, I think you're on something there. So,
yeah, Jeff said it right, and I think there's a logistic issue here too. I mean, you got 5,000.
Yeah,
it's not just 5,000 people; it's 5,000 men. So you got a lot more.
Yeah,
and you got to get the food out.
You know, it's like when you're at a men's conference and they only have one buffet line opened up, you get irritated. You know, when's it going to be my turn? Then they finally open up the other table and they go, oh, okay, much better. So here we go. Okay, he gave thanks. He distributed to those who were seated. We talked about that. Now underlined as much as they wanted. I love this. Again, just there's so much in here. The text also states that the distribution of both bread and fish was in abundance, as much as they wanted. And I just find that just fascinating. What are your thoughts regarding this? Before I kind of talk, you know, what are your thoughts in this? As much as they wanted.
Our God is a big God.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Go more, Dave.
Piggybacking on that, I think that it shows how unlimited it was. So therefore, it was not from man. There was no way that this came from man because man is limited. I've been working on the disaster relief, feeding the people that are displaced from the fire, and we've run out of food a number of times. And I was like, this just shows that this was not from man. This was from God, and there was therefore abundance, and it was overflowing, and they had all they needed.
Uh-huh. So, Jeff, if this is from God, which I think you're absolutely, what does this tell us about God?
There's no limit. There's no limit to what he can provide for us
Yeah.
and will provide for us when it's the stuff that we need.
Yeah.
So I think, Mike, this idea that he wants to bless us, right? So when we want to be blessed, we want just the mere meager amount, right? We don't want to be selfish, you know, just give me. So I think of John 10, where Jesus comes and says, hey, I've come that you'd have life and have it abundantly.
Yeah.
Right. And as opposed to having enough life to get by. Right. I'll meet your meager needs, which takes me back to the wedding at Cana with the water to wine. Yeah. How come he didn't? That was awful, Jesus. Why'd you give them so much to get drunk? Just give them what they needed or missed, you know, and he gave them enough for a year's supply of wine. I mean, I don't know how much it was, but so this is on that same venue, right? This idea.
It exactly is. And John, what this study is, you know, where the study and other things I'm reading is, I'm just wondering how much, in personalizing, how much has my mind and heart been limited to receive? We think the problem is on God's end, but I'm not so sure. Yeah, you know, I'm wondering just how much we're limiting, how much we're limiting our understanding of how blessed we are and our ability, in our inability to receive, because we want to solve the problem in this case. So that's where my mind has been going. Yeah.
Mike, I got a different take on this.
Yeah, tell us.
Well, first of all, Jesus, when he does this stuff, he's pulling from the future. He's pulling the eschaton, or the kingdom of God. He's bringing it into the present. So we have that element to this here. But he's going to be gone soon. He's leaving his disciples for it. And I know that I've read reports of miraculous feedings here and there that we get, especially when you get in third world countries and stuff.
Right.
But the more important factor is he gives us the challenge of doing that, and we have it. I mean, everything I know from working with Food for the Hungry was we do not have a shortage of food. We have a shortage of kindness, ability to get it to people. We can feed the world, not just the United States, but there's plenty of food for everybody. but it's not getting to them. And so he's saying, you do it now, you do it with your hands. I'm not trying to take the miraculous out of this, but there's a lot of people who believe in Jesus who are hungry. There are a lot of people who believe in Jesus who are starving. What's the problem here? Where's the miracle? Maybe the miracle is us. I'm not trying to reduce the miraculous of this event, but in terms of the play out on it into the future when Jesus is gone. So that's what I struggle with.
Well, I think your take, I think, is not necessarily a different direction, but it certainly is a deeper direction. I think, Bill, just feedback what you're saying is, what I heard you say is, the problem is not in the amount of resource, the food, but from your understanding, the problem is the bottleneck occurs in the hands to distribute the food. That's right.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah, Dick.
I don't think verse 11 actually shows the whole story, because I kind of cheated and peeked ahead to verse 13.
Yeah.
And everybody got as much as they wanted, plus there was 12 baskets left of the bread. So yeah, he went well beyond their expectations and needs.
He sure did, yes. And as I recall, I mean, I think when we get to 13, we're going to see who picked up the fragments. Who went out and collected the fragments?
The disciples.
Yeah.
Disciples did.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, we'll talk about that more when we get there, but.
One of the secrets of men's groups for the buffet line is be at the end. Everyone's kind of cautious what they take, and you get plenty if you're at the end. You don't have to be guilty about it.
Although, in converse to that, I went to a men's meat smoking barbecue function one night, and they really poorly planned it, and the feeding of the multitude miracle didn't happen. And we were table 41, and so table 41, they were rationing pretty tight by the time we got there, Bill. I think we got one German smoked sausage. I'll tell you what, those plates coming off tables 1 through 15, those plates were piled high with enough barbecue to feed a multitude. So. All right. So, I wanted to just kind of stop and talk about these things a little bit. And there's been some, great comments in there. And I think what we're seeing, God is a God of abundance and a God who desires to bless. I mean, that is certainly my take on it, that from the get-go, that it didn't start 2,000 years ago, but God, by his very nature, has always sought to reach out and to bless. So therein is, where is the bottleneck, Bill? Well, it could be us in our ability to receive. So Jesus took the loaves, having given thanks, he distributed to those who were seated, likewise also of the fish, as much as they wanted. So, after Jesus quiets the demand, that was in, I believe, verse 10. We're kind of summarizing here. He expresses gratitude for what is present. I love that. If you and I could keep that in mind every time we give thanks in a meal, expressing gratitude for what is present. If we could keep that in mind every morning in our morning prayer as we awaken, we're having our hot cup of coffee over our open Bible, and we express gratitude for what is present. Just in the very room, in the very chair that you're sitting in, the very breath that you and I are breathing in and inhaling and exhaling, the sense of warmth and the sense of love that is characterized of your home, and people who love you and you love people. These are what is present in our lives. And expressing gratitude for those things and recognition is just It's a life-giving exercise. So he expressed gratitude for what is present, followed by a free and abundant distribution of all. So we got this demand that's quieted, this expression of gratitude, and then this free distribution to all, as much as they wanted. Not a rationing out, one German sausage and one slice of brisket per plate. Nothing like that. It was all they wanted, and they kept just giving. So the question then, and we're just going to stay as a group here and discuss this, until we think it's time to quit. But what is there to learn here, guys, in regard to these four components? What's there to learn? We have a high demand, stressful situation. We've got the presence of gratitude. We've got the presence of giving it away, freely giving to all in abundance. And we've got the overarching component of provision. There's a lot there, guys, but let's just start playing around with these words. What hits you here? What can we learn?
Expectancy.
Well, I've heard that from you before. Go tell us more.
Well, Jesus knew his Father pretty well. And he knew that his Father was all in all. He knew that in any situation, his Father was not only capable of, but willing to bring forth what needed to be brought forth. So he had a relationship with his Father that he didn't take it for granted. He just knew who his Father was. He wasn't being presumptuous. He wasn't laying down any of his own guidelines or his own expectations. Rather, he was saying, Dad, I know you really, really well. So in expectancy, I'm really excited to see what it is you're going to do and how you're going to do it. But I know you're going to do it.
Yeah.
You mentioned,
Yeah.
Go ahead. You mentioned quiet's a demand. I want to bring that down into that last line. If there's this sense of, to be biblical, a sense of shalom that always surrounds Jesus. He doesn't ever seem to be in panic mode. He can get mad, but even that was like, went to the temple, he took all night to ponder what to do, but it was still out of a sense of not urgency, just a sense of peace. Okay, let's see, back to you. He was always in a quiet state, it seems. Maybe there's a couple exceptions there, but he doesn't panic.
Yeah.
And
Well,
maybe because
do we, Bill? Okay, I understand that, but how does that correlate to you and me? What are your thoughts there?
Psalm, the 136th Psalm talks about God's love endures forever. The Message states it, God's love never quits. And so we have that to rely on. That's the calm presence of Jesus is just a visual
There you go.
display of God's love never quitting on his creation, for his creation.
Mike, I want to expand on what Dave was saying about expectation.
Yeah.
And this word high demand. The high demand is in our eyes. It's not in God's, because that's not a high demand. The things we desire and ask for in our lives from God maybe seem like a high demand to us, but they are not a high demand for God. So when it's provided It's provided in abundance, but it's still very little of what God can do in our lives. And our expectation is that it's a high demand and God's going to have a hard time providing this. But no, that's not God's expectation. He can provide all you need, and he can provide in abundance. So it's not a high demand. That's just our view and our expectation of what the demand is.
That's why I make the distinction between expectation and expectancy. We too often walk in expectation, which puts limits. But if we walk in expectancy, we're walking to be open to let God do what he wants to do and what he's able to do.
Right. And I also think that when we don't receive, it might be the fact that we lack this gratitude that's there. And he's gonna provide, come almost to the level of our gratitude. So if we're grumbling and not appreciating what God is providing for us in our lives, then the provision is less, but it's not limited by what God wants to do. It's limited by our own expectancy and our own gratitude.
And this actually leads in, you guys are already kind of going down the avenue I'd like to see us go down, is if all this is true, what we're saying, then how do we put ourselves in this position? You know, what is our part in putting ourselves in a position where we can really receive what is there, what is possible? You guys have identified a couple of things here: expectancy and gratitude. What are other thoughts on this? You know, how do we, if we look at God, as Bob has already told us, as one who's just a giver, how do we put ourselves in a position to receive?
You know, the question's been running through my mind is, given all of this, why every time we encounter something similar to this, why is our trust so limited?
Well, that is the key question. Yes, why is it? What are your thoughts on that?
You know, I don't know. I guess it's just that my faith is not developed to the point that I release control.
Any other thoughts?
I think for me, a lot of times I get focused on the present. I get focused on what's going on and what it is that I'm asking God to do and intervene, whether it's a situation at work or my marriage or whatever, my finances, whatever the case may be. I'm focused on that. And like Bob was saying, I'm not looking back and seeing how faithful God has been in the past.
Exactly.
So I limit the hope I have for the future. So that the focus is the problem. I'm so focused on what's going on and what the problem is that I'm not seeing the previous solutions, which give me hope to the future.
Yeah, to go with that one, I remember about a year ago talking to Bob Powell, and this is, my wife died 3 ago, so this would have been, a year and a half into it. And Bob said, at the Moot House, he said, "Are you thankful?" And I looked at him like, "Are you crazy? Thankful? What do you mean, am I thankful?" And he says, "No, are you thankful for all the good times you had?" And so, Jeff, as you're talking about, which way you're looking, right? So, yeah, I'll never forget that. That was one of those changes in life for me.
Wow. Yeah. That's a big story there. So Bob has put on the table, why is it that when we find ourselves in this, what's depicted here in the story, we find ourselves reverting back to, as Jeff says, problem solving. We can relate to the Philip and the Andrew, making the assessment, making an assessment and telling Jesus why it won't work.
I
I
think you
relate to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you said something earlier that it just won't leave my mind.
Yeah.
So when I think of John 6, at least I think it's 6, these guys come to Jesus and say, what should we do that we do the works of God? You know, and us men, you know, we're all about doing, right? That just doesn't ever seem to leave our genetics. And and the answer is, well, believe. It comes back to believe. And so you said earlier, Mike, how much are we limiting, and I forget how you said it, I wrote down, how much are we limiting, I guess, limiting ourselves by our inability to receive. So I don't know how you said that, but.
Yeah, yeah, you got it, yeah.
Right, so somehow this whole thing of giving has to do with receiving. Or
yeah.
There's a part of it here that, right, and the hardest thing for men to do is to receive a free gift, right?
Yeah.
Right. You know, Jesus, problem solving, I don't know if necessarily that's the problem. They just weren't solving it the right way. I mean, we are told to solve. I mean, Jesus basically said, "Can you solve this problem? How are we going to get the food? Where are we going to buy it?" He gave them the problem. Now they're rushed to a problem solving. Said, "We can't do it." I'm not sure if problem solving is a problem here. It's a problem that came to the wrong conclusion.
Well, the question wasn't how. The question was where.
Well, a couple of the other ones in the other versions, you feed them. He gave an order to feed them, and he said, "Where are you going to buy it?" But both of them present the disciples with the problem, and I mean, that was a question of where are you going to buy it? But here's a problem, guys. So I'm not sure if problem solving is necessarily the issue. It's where how you solve the problem is kind of more the issue for me here. And we talk about receiving and stuff. Forgive me, I've got to put on a little bit of my social justice hat and says we've received a lot. The problem is, are we givers? I mean, there's a lot of things out there that are being called upon us to do, and we go, it's kind of like the guy in James that says, don't go by the guy and say, be warm and well fed and walk away. Not when you have a jacket to give them. I mean, I'm taking this a little off course here. I don't mean to, but I'm just saying problems can be, sometimes we have the solutions and we don't want to, but because we are scared of a lack. If we give it away, we won't have anything. So I just took it that direction for a minute.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, Bill. We have been abundantly blessed. The problem is, now the we is a very general we. Let's say westernized people who live in a society like ours. We live as if we're in poverty, that there isn't enough. And so the question in my mind is, how do we get to put ourselves in a position where we really realize what we have been given, and that there is no, that we don't need to be fearful of lack, that there is enough. We live as if there is not enough. I have to take at the men's barbecue, I have to take a plate that is so large that because there may not be enough. I may not be able to go back and have seconds.
Great metaphor.
Yeah.
The analogy, yeah.
Yeah.
Mike,
so what? Yeah.
I'm thinking, and I'm seeing that we're talking about two different groups here. One of the group we're focused on right now, I think, with what has been said by Bill, is that we're putting ourselves in the place of the disciples, and that is true. They received, so they were able to give. But a lot of times for me, I'm in the crowd, but I'm going, are you kidding me? Fish and bread? That's all we get? I'm not the guy that's saying, oh, Lord, look at the abundance you've given me. I'm complaining about what he's given.
Yes.
Well, there's more work that needs to be done in you, Jeff, clearly.
Fish again? Fish again? Oh, God. Jeff's a little bit profound in that, though. You can chew on that one for a while.
Well, I can identify with, I think we would all say, Jeff, thanks for your honesty there.
I was being, pretty serious, because there's too many times when we get blessed, and we were talking about that, how blessed we are, but we don't realize how blessed we are. So we gripe about it, and then we don't have a heart that is ready to give out of the abundance that God has.
Yeah, because there's no perceived abundance. It's a perceived lack.
Yeah.
That's why, as elementary as it may seem at times, what Mike was saying earlier about giving thanks. Giving thanks is a really good vehicle to put us in the perspective of realizing how much we have been given.
Yeah.
And find yourself like at a prayer for a meal or thanks. In my case, in our case, it's never just about the food. We're sitting there, and if it's an evening meal or prayer, it's about all the wonderful, incredible things that he's done through the day, giving thanks for those things, for relationships, for expressions of truth and beauty and grace that he's dropped in our lap. Somebody defined life as just all the little things that happen every day, and to stop and give thanks is to force us gently to remember exactly what you're talking about, Jeff, that he's given us so much. So the simple act of giving thanks is a very profound act, and it doesn't stop with just the giving of the thanks. It's a generator for other things.
Well, I think, Dave, what you have just said very succinctly and gracefully is really a key component in understanding this text, at least from my perspective, is that we've brought up this whole question of this demonstration of problem solving. And we've looked at a slide that shows the disciples' way of thinking and Jesus's way of thinking. What you just described, Dave, is on the left side of what Jesus is demonstrating for all his disciples at this moment in time in this situation. Now, let me rewind a bit. I'm a fan of problem solving, but I think problem solving has its place. And I also think that we as human beings tend to gravitate to this type of thinking. We default to this, let's call it a binary way of thinking: in and out, right and wrong, Republican, Democrat right now. We tend as human beings to polarize and become very binary and in our way of thinking. And I'm not opposed to that. I think it is great and has its place, especially if you're building rockets. You have to have binary kind of people to solve binary kind of problems. However, I think what Jesus is demonstrating to us and his disciples, those he is training to take his place on earth to spread the gospel, is a different set of tools, a different way of thinking. And that way of thinking is something that is counterintuitive, something that has to be learned and developed over time. You and I, as men of our age, we are well in that journey, but maybe we've never labeled it. Dave has expressed that way of thinking very well. When it comes to things like love, when it comes to things like death, when it comes to things like pain and suffering and misfortune, binary thinking is limited. it requires a much more comprehensive view that Jesus is expressing in this high demand, critical situation. And he does such simple things as taking what is present and pointing. This is where, Bill, the where is a critical question. It's not a type of, it's not a binary question. It's where do we go? Where do we go? And that where is to his heavenly Father, from which all, all things are derived, and all things find their meaning. And I think I believe that we as men should maybe think about that slide. What is my way of thinking? And how is this, or could this in some way be limiting me to really getting it, meaning understanding how blessed I am and how much I have been given, and therefore how much I have to give. Yeah, so there's my soapbox for this morning. Dave, you have any more comments on that?
Your mic's on. Off.
There we go. No, I don't think so. I have to be careful when sharing in a group or whatever to not give any impression that yours truly has it all figured out and I do everything right all the time. We're all on this learning process,
Yeah,
but
of course,
ultimately and simply stated, the God of the universe is the loving and ready and giving source of anything and everything that we need. And anything that we do to remove ourselves from that relationship or that constant contact is to our lack, which is not what he wants for us. So
right.
the closer we can stay to him, in him, all the time, in everything that we do, it pleases him. And when he's pleased, we're blessed. And that's a gross simplification of what faith is really all about. And of course, Jesus is the only one who is fully in him all the time, 100%. But that's our goal. And if we're problem solving, or if we're in argument with someone about something or discussion with something, when you stop, look, and listen, he's got the answers. He's got every answer we ever needed. He's got answers to questions we haven't even asked yet.
Yeah. Well, you have a way of saying things in a very, very good way, Dave. So we appreciate your wisdom. Yeah, Jesus is showing us the way. You guys, what you just said, Dave, and when you were talking, my mind went to earlier in our discussion, at least to two keywords that could be prompters, triggers, in to help us to put ourselves in a position like this, to receive or to understand or recognize would be better. Those two words are expectancy, that came from Dave specifically, and expectancy. And Jeff emphasized gratitude. And, just maybe a way to think about them is, where is their expectancy in this situation? Where is the gratitude, or where can gratitude be expressed? Could really change our perspective on things as we navigate through life.
Can I make one comment on it, Mike?
Of course. Yeah.
the preceding paragraph in this section made a special statement that this was Passover.
Yeah,
And the expectancies, Jesus is kind of saying, we're in a new Passover. And your expectancies get fed. Guess what? All you got to do is ask God for it, and He'll provide it. And that's just a shortcut there.
Yeah. You know, I'm going to comment on that. It is so good, and it is so key. We looked at that, I think, a couple of weeks ago before you joined us, Bill, that it is no accident in the opening of the chapter, and it was Passover. And I've got a take on this. I'll share with you guys. The Passover, and Dave, you would know, you've forgotten more about Passover than I will know, but I'll make this statement. I think that during Passover time, the general feel, like there's a general feel at Christmas. And so the general feel, the group think at Passover was a remembrance of a release from slavery, a release from, a salvation from, being set free from. And, you know, because all of the actions during Passover was a release from. Now, Dave, you could really tear this apart if I'm wrong, but I think that was the case. I think why this text is here, why this story is here, one reason is that it is really pointing to what you are being saved to. This, you are being brought, you are from. I think our heads generally stay in the from mode, but there is a more comprehensive view of our relationship with God through Jesus Christ. It involves being saved from, and it involves what are you being saved towards. And this story really represents the other side of Passover. You know, Passover was intended to release from in order to be brought to a new land. And we know the delay, they got delayed in the wilderness for an entire generation. I wonder if that speaks into our human nature, our ability to receive. Just like they could not receive. And so they just kept, okay, just take another lap. And another, and another, and another. But finally, we as human beings, if we continue the journey, we get it. And that it is much more, guys, than just being saved from something. But we are being brought through the work of Christ. We are being saved towards and being brought into a wonderful experience that begins now and that will continue on. And Jesus called that life abundant. So there's a second soapbox, Bill.
I'm done.
Guys, thank you for your contribution. These are things that hit us, and this is where we live. What do? We know the stories, but when it comes, Bob, when it comes right down to these high demand situations, why does my head revert to thus and so? Whereas right before me, I have an example of the God-man who stands and gives thanks, expresses gratitude, distributes freely, and is provided for. Wow.
On the heels, Mike, of your great expression about Passover and what was going on, just a tickler for those of you who are maybe interested or do such things as Friday begins the Feast of Tabernacles, which is another amazing feast yet to be prophetically fulfilled. Passover has been fulfilled, but Tabernacles is not yet, so we have that to look forward to.
Why don't you, we've got a few minutes, Dave, why don't you tell us a little bit about the significance of Tabernacle, the Feast of Booths, for us? I mean, how you see it in relating.
Well, I ruffle feathers when I get into this one because
Well, just keep it high level.
Tabernacles is a remembrance in very simple terms. It's a command from the Lord to remember the times that he dwelt with his people.
Oh, wow.
The tabernacles represent the booths and the tents and so forth that they lived in during the Exodus on the way to the Promised Land. And the feast is designed to bring recognition and, if you will, go back to Thanksgiving for what he provided. It was an absence of lack. They had everything they needed. They didn't have everything they wanted, but they had everything they needed. And that's where we need to be. We need to recognize that we have, we don't have everything we want, but he gives us everything that we need, and then in great abundance. Prophetically speaking, I believe that the Feast of Tabernacles represents the birth of Christ, because it's a symbol of God dwelling with us. That's the whole idea of God to dwell with us in our tabernacles. So this is the season when we celebrate the birth of Christ dwelling in us.
Yeah, good. Man, a lot of correlation. Guys, we're going to sign off, and I'm going to go join the generator wars for the day, and you guys go off and go do your whatever you're going to be doing, and good to be with you. Thanks for your contributions, you guys, your great thoughts today, and for your quiet willingness to hear and to listen from each of us. So we'll pick it up next week. On to verse 12. Yay.
Thanks, Mike.
All righty.
Thanks, Mike.
Have a good
Thanks, Mike.
Have a good week, guys. Good.
Bye.
Good being with you. Bye now.
Perfect.